So this happened 3 years ago, but I'm finally ready to talk about it because the aftermath is still playing out and honestly, I need to get this off my chest. Some of you are probably going to think I'm petty as hell, but I don't care anymore. Background. I'm Knox, 28 now. Was 25 when this went down. I work retail at Target. Yeah, I know how that sounds, but it pays the bills and I actually like the work. My fiancée Colleen was 26, worked some corporate job that she constantly reminded me paid way better than mine. We'd been together 3 years, engaged for 8 months. Here's the thing, though. Colleen came from money. Her parents owned rental properties all over the state. Her dad managed some investment firm. Basically, she grew up never worrying about anything financial. Me? I grew up with my mom working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat after my dad bailed when I was 12. Different worlds, you know? At first, she seemed to think it was cute that I was more blue-collar. She'd bring her friends by the store and introduce me to them, talking about how refreshing it was to date someone real instead of another corporate suit. But that started changing about a year into our relationship. Little comments here and there about maybe I should look into going back to school or maybe I could apply for management positions or wouldn't I be happier doing something with more growth potential? The comments got sharper as time went on. She'd compare my paycheck to hers when we talked about vacation plans or buying furniture for the apartment we shared. She started insisting we split everything 50-50 even though she made almost double what I did, then getting irritated when I had to say no to expensive restaurants or weekend trips. Her friends stopped coming by the store. But here's what really started eating at me. I found out she was telling people I was just working retail temporarily while I figured out my real career. She was straight up lying about my situation, making it sound like I was some college graduate slumming it until I found my calling. When I confronted her about it, she said she was just trying to help my image with her social circle. That's when I realized she was embarrassed by me. Not just disappointed or concerned, actually ashamed to be with someone who folded clothes for a living. And instead of just breaking up with me, she was trying to manage my reputation while pushing me to become someone different. The engagement ring situation should have been my first major red flag. We'd been talking about marriage, and I saved up for months to buy her a ring. Nothing crazy expensive because I couldn't afford crazy expensive, but it was real, and it was beautiful, and it cost me 2 months' salary. When I proposed, she said yes, but then spent the next week comparing it to her friends' rings and suggesting we could upgrade it later when I was more established in my career. More established in my career. Like my job was some temporary phase I was going through. After that, every conversation about our future came with conditions. We could buy a house once I finished my degree. We could have kids once I was making more money. We could travel once I had a job with better vacation benefits. Everything was once I became someone else. But I wasn't planning on becoming someone else. I liked my job, I was good at it, and I was working my way up through the company. I had a 5-year plan that involved staying exactly where I was and growing within retail management. That wasn't good enough for Colleen, though. The breaking point conversation happened about 2 months before our anniversary dinner. She sat me down and told me she'd been thinking about our future and she was concerned about our long-term compatibility. She said she loved me, but she needed to know I was serious about improving our financial situation. She'd found some night school programs I could look into, some companies that were hiring for entry-level corporate positions. Basically, a whole career change roadmap she'd researched without asking me. I told her I didn't want to change careers. I told her I was happy with my work and my goals, and if that wasn't enough for her, maybe we needed to reconsider things. She got upset and said I was being defensive and that she was only trying to help me reach my potential. That's when I knew for sure. She didn't see me as someone with different goals and values. She saw me as someone failing to live up to what she thought I should be, and she was going to keep pushing and pushing until I either gave in or she found someone who already fit her image of success. So I started planning, not planning to change my career or upgrade my life to meet her standards. Planning for what I was going to do when she finally showed her true colors publicly. Our 3rd anniversary was coming up and she insisted we go somewhere nice to celebrate. She picked this upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where appetizers cost more than my lunch budget for a week. I agreed to go because I had a feeling this dinner was going to be significant. I spent the weeks leading up to it watching her behavior more carefully, how she talked about me to her friends when she thought I wasn't listening, how she handled introducing me to new people, how she reacted when anyone asked about my job or our plans. She was setting up for something. I could feel it in how she'd been acting lately. More distant, more critical, asking pointed questions about my future plans like she was building a case. Her friends had been giving me weird looks the last few times we'd all hung out together, like they knew something I didn't. 3 days before our anniversary dinner, she spent 2 hours on the phone with her best friend Linda, talking about how she needed to make some difficult decisions about her life. She thought I was in the shower, but I heard enough to know the difficult decision was about me. The night of our anniversary, she took forever getting ready. Full makeup, hairstyled, wore this dress I'd never seen before that probably cost more than I made in a week. She was nervous but trying to hide it, checking her phone constantly, acting like she was preparing for something bigger than dinner. When we got to the restaurant, she insisted on a table in the main dining room instead of somewhere quieter. She wanted to be seen. She ordered wine I knew she couldn't normally afford and kept checking the time like she was waiting for something. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a normal anniversary dinner. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, and finally it was about to happen. Update 1. Holy hell. The response to my first post has been incredible. Thanks to everyone who reached out. Some of you have been through similar situations and your messages mean a lot. A few people asked for more details about what actually went down that night. So here's what happened at the restaurant. We got seated at this prime table right in the center of the dining room. I'm talking about the kind of spot where everyone can see you, which should have been my final warning that Colleen had planned this whole thing out. She kept adjusting her position so she was facing the room, checking her makeup and her phone camera, acting like she was about to give a performance. The first hour was almost normal, though. We ordered appetizers, she got her expensive wine, we talked about work and made small talk about our future plans. But I could tell she was building up to something because she kept steering the conversation back to my job and my goals. She asked me again if I'd thought about the night school programs she'd researched. When I said no, she got this look on her face like I'd just confirmed something she already knew. Then she started talking about her coworkers and how they'd been asking about our wedding plans. She mentioned how her boss had commented that it was sweet that I had such a stable job, even if it wasn't the most ambitious career path. The way she said it, like she was quoting him directly, made it clear she'd been discussing my employment situation with her entire office. I asked her what exactly she'd been telling people about my work, and that's when things started getting tense. She said she'd been honest about what I did, but that she always emphasized how I was working my way up and had plans for growth. I told her I never said I had plans for growth outside of retail, and she got defensive, saying she was just trying to present me in the best possible light to her professional network. That's when I realized how deep this went. She hadn't just been embarrassed by my job. She'd been actively managing my reputation behind my back, creating this narrative that I was temporarily working retail while pursuing something better. She'd been lying to everyone she knew about who I actually was and what I actually wanted. I called her out on it right there at the table. I told her she'd been misrepresenting me to people for months and that I was tired of being treated like a work in progress. She got upset and said I was being unreasonable, that she was only trying to help me succeed, and that I should be grateful she cared enough about our future to think strategically about these things. Grateful. She wanted me to be grateful that she was ashamed of me. That's when I knew for sure that everything I'd been planning was justified. This woman had been systematically undermining my identity while pretending it was for my own good. She saw me as a project to fix, not a person to love. But here's the thing. I'd spent months preparing for exactly this conversation. While she'd been researching night school programs and entry-level corporate jobs for me, I'd been doing my own research about her social circle, about the image she was so desperate to maintain. See, Colleen's professional success wasn't just about her salary. Her entire identity was built around being seen as successful and put together. She networked constantly, posted carefully curated content on her LinkedIn about her achievements, and had spent years building this reputation as someone who had her life figured out. Her relationship with me was starting to contradict that image. I'd been quietly documenting things for months, screenshots of her social media posts where she cropped me out or avoided mentioning my job, messages between her and her friends where she made excuses for my career choices, times when she'd introduced me to new people and deliberately kept the conversation away from what I did for work. But the biggest thing I'd figured out was why she was really with me in the first place. It wasn't because she loved me despite my job. It was because she thought she could change me. She'd seen me as someone with potential who just needed the right motivation and guidance. Dating someone she could improve made her feel important and needed. When that improvement didn't happen on her timeline, I became a liability instead of a project. So when she started getting more heated at dinner, talking about how I was wasting my potential and how she couldn't understand why I was so resistant to bettering myself, I just listened. I let her dig herself deeper into this hole where she was basically admitting that she'd never actually accepted me for who I was. She talked about how her friends had been asking when I was going to propose a timeline for finishing my education, how her parents had expressed concerns about our long-term financial compatibility, how she'd been making excuses for my lack of ambition for months and was running out of ways to explain my choices to people who mattered in her life. Then she said the thing that made everything clear. She told me she loved me, but that love wasn't enough if I wasn't willing to grow with her. She needed a partner who shared her drive for success and who understood that image and perception mattered in building a life together. I asked her what exactly she meant by image and perception. That's when she really started letting her true feelings show. She talked about how exhausting it was to constantly worry about how our relationship looked to other people, how she'd had to work overtime to convince her professional contacts that I was more than just some retail worker, how she needed to be with someone who could enhance her reputation instead of requiring her to manage theirs. The entitlement was incredible. She genuinely believed that I should be grateful for all the work she'd put into making me seem more acceptable to her social circle. She thought I should see her efforts to upgrade my image as proof of how much she cared about our future. I told her I'd never asked her to manage my reputation, and that if she was embarrassed by who I was, maybe she should reconsider being with me. She said she wasn't embarrassed, just realistic about what it takes to succeed in her world. Her world. Like we weren't supposed to be building a world together. That's when she really started escalating the conversation. She said I was being defensive and immature, that I was missing the point entirely. She said successful couples support each other's growth, and that my refusal to even consider improving my situation was selfish and short-sighted. I asked her what would happen if I decided to stay exactly where I was in retail management. If I made it clear that this was my chosen career path and I had no intention of changing it to fit her vision of success. The pause before she answered told me everything I needed to know. But what she said next confirmed that everything I'd been planning was about to be necessary. She said she couldn't see herself building a life with someone who wasn't willing to reach their full potential. That's when her phone buzzed with a text message, and she got this look on her face. She checked it quickly and then looked around the restaurant like she was expecting someone. And that's when I knew the real show was about to begin. Update 2. Okay, so the comments on my last update have been insane. Shout out to whoever said they could smell the setup coming from a mile away. You were absolutely right. And to the person who said I should have seen this coming and prepared accordingly, well, keep reading because I definitely did. So there we were. Colleen had just gotten that text and was scanning the restaurant like she was waiting for someone to show up. I could see her whole demeanor change. She went from defensive about our argument to almost excited, like she was about to get some kind of backup or validation. She looked at me across the table and said she thought we needed to be honest with each other about where this relationship was really going. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking lately and talking to people whose opinions she valued about our future together. The way she said talking to people made it clear she'd been getting advice about whether to stay with me. I asked her what kind of advice she'd been getting and from who. That's when she told me she'd been discussing our relationship with someone who'd helped her gain some perspective on what she really deserved in a partner. Someone who understood ambition and success in ways that I apparently didn't. That's when it clicked. The text, the fancy restaurant, the dress I'd never seen before. The way she kept checking her appearance. She hadn't just been planning to have a difficult conversation with me, she'd been planning to have an audience for it. I asked her if she was expecting someone to join us, and she got this look on her face like I'd caught her at something. She said she might have mentioned to a friend that we'd be here tonight, just in case the conversation didn't go well and she needed support afterward. A friend, right. That's when I saw this guy walk into the restaurant and start looking around. Tall, expensive suit. Looked like he'd stepped out of some medical drama show. Colleen saw him too, and her whole face lit up. She waved him over, and that's when I knew exactly what was about to happen. But here's the thing. I'd been preparing for this exact scenario for months. While Colleen had been planning her grand exit, I'd been doing my own research and making my own preparations. See, I'd figured out weeks ago that she was seeing someone else. Not because I found texts or emails, but because her entire behavior pattern had changed. She'd started working late more often, always with excuses about important projects and deadlines. She'd become obsessed with her appearance in ways that went beyond just wanting to look good for work. She'd started getting defensive about her phone and keeping it face down during our conversations. Classic signs that anyone who's been cheated on will recognize. But instead of confronting her about it, I decided to let her play out whatever plan she was building, because I knew that someone as image-obsessed as Colleen wouldn't be content with just quietly breaking up with me. She'd want to make a statement about it, something that would justify her actions to everyone who knew us. The guy approached our table and Colleen introduced him as Dr. Antonio Raul. She said he was a friend from her networking group who she'd mentioned our relationship troubles to, and she'd asked him to stop by in case we needed an outside perspective on our situation. An outside perspective on our 3-year relationship. From some guy I'd never heard of until that moment. Dr. Raul sat down and immediately started talking about how Colleen had shared some of her concerns about our future compatibility. He said it was clear that she was a driven, ambitious person who needed a partner who could match her energy and vision for success. He talked about how important it was for couples to be equally invested in building a life together. The condescension was unbelievable. This guy who didn't know me at all was sitting at our anniversary dinner, explaining to me what my fiancé needed in a relationship. And Colleen was nodding along like he was making perfect sense. I asked Colleen how long she'd been discussing our private relationship issues with Dr. Raoul. She said they'd become friends over the past few months, and that he'd been helpful in giving her clarity about what she wanted out of life. Dr. Raoul added that sometimes it takes an outside perspective to help people see situations clearly. That's when I realized they thought they were tag teaming me, like they'd planned this whole intervention to convince me that I needed to change or that Colleen deserved better than what I could offer. They were both sitting there looking at me like I was some kind of project they were trying to fix. Dr. Raoul started talking about his own career path and how he'd built his practice through dedication and strategic planning. He mentioned his income level, his recent vacation to Monaco, the importance of setting ambitious goals and achieving them, all while looking directly at me like he was providing an example of what real success looked like. Colleen was eating it up. She kept making comments about how refreshing it was to talk to someone who understood the value of professional achievement and financial planning. She said it had made her realize how much she'd been settling in her own relationship. Settling. She said that right in front of me. That's when I knew it was time to execute the plan I'd been working on for weeks. Because while they'd been planning this little ambush, I'd been gathering information about both of them that they had no idea I had access to. See, I'd been suspicious about Colleen's new networking friend for weeks. She'd mentioned Dr. Raoul in passing a few times, always in the context of professional advice and career guidance. But something about the way she brought him up felt off. She'd get this look when she talked about their conversations, like she was sharing something special that I wouldn't understand. So I did what any rational person would do. I looked him up. His professional profile was easy to find, and from there it was simple enough to track down his social media presence. That's when things got interesting. Dr. Antonio Raoul wasn't just some successful bachelor giving career advice to ambitious women. He was a married father of two who apparently had a very active social life that his wife didn't seem to be aware of. His Instagram was full of expensive restaurant visits, luxury hotel stays, and high-end shopping trips that definitely weren't family vacations. But the real goldmine was his credit card activity. Turns out, when you're dating someone for 3 years and they trust you enough to let you handle some of their financial planning, you learn a lot about how to access information when you need it. Colleen had shared her social media passwords with me months ago, and Dr. Raoul had been tagged in enough of her recent posts that I could piece together their timeline. Monaco wasn't a business trip. The Cartier jewelry wasn't a congratulations gift for her promotion. This guy had been systematically lying to both his wife and my fiancé about the nature of his relationships with other women. I looked at Dr. Raoul and asked him how his wife felt about him providing relationship counseling to other women. The color drained from his face and Colleen looked confused. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screenshots I'd taken of his social media profiles, including the family photos with his wife and 2 kids that he'd posted just last month. But I didn't stop there. I also had screenshots of his recent credit card statements, showing payments to the hotel in Monaco, the Cartier store, and about a dozen expensive restaurants over the past 2 months, all on dates when he'd told his wife he was working late or attending medical conferences. Turns out, Dr. Raoul hadn't mentioned to Colleen that he was married, and he definitely hadn't told his wife that he was taking other women to Monaco or buying them expensive jewelry. Colleen started demanding to know what I was talking about, and Dr. Raoul tried to explain that his marriage was complicated and that he and his wife had an understanding. I asked him if his wife knew about that understanding and if she'd approved his recent expenses on romantic getaways with other women. That's when Colleen realized she'd been played just as much as I had. But instead of directing her anger at Dr. Raoul for lying to her, she got furious with me for embarrassing her in front of him. She said I was being vindictive and petty, trying to ruin her chance at happiness because I couldn't handle the fact that she'd found someone better. Someone better. A married man who'd been lying to her about his availability. But Colleen was so invested in the image of upgrading her life that she couldn't admit she'd been manipulated. Instead, she doubled down. She stood up at the table and started talking loudly enough for other diners to hear. She said she was finally free from someone who had no ambition or drive to improve himself. She pointed at me and announced that she'd wasted 3 years on someone who made $30,000 folding clothes at Target while she'd found a real man who knew how to succeed in life. The restaurant got quiet and people started staring. Colleen pulled out her phone and started showing pictures from her trip to Monaco, talking about the Cartier jewelry Dr. Raoul had bought her and how different it was to be with someone who understood quality and success. She threw her engagement ring at me and called it fake, just like everything else about our relationship. She said the diamond was worthless and that she was done pretending to be satisfied with someone who would never amount to anything. That's when other people in the restaurant started pulling out their phones to record what was happening, and that's when I started laughing. Final update. You guys, the response to this story has been absolutely wild. So many of you called exactly what was going to happen, and some of the advice about not going down to their level has been noted. But honestly, after 3 years of planning this, I was ready to see it through. So there I was, laughing in the middle of this expensive restaurant while Colleen was having her public meltdown and Dr. Raoul was trying to disappear into his chair. People were recording, the staff was staring, and she was still going on about how she was finally free to be with someone who understood success and ambition. The thing is, I wasn't laughing because I thought the situation was funny. I was laughing because everything was going exactly according to the plan I'd spent months putting together. While she was throwing her tantrum and showing off her Monaco photos to strangers, I was already 3 steps ahead of both of them. See, I'd been recording our entire conversation that night, not just the parts where Dr. Raoul showed up, but everything from the moment we sat down. Every comment about my job, every condescending remark about my ambition, every detail about her secret relationship with a married man, all of it captured on my phone, which had been sitting on the table the entire time in plain sight. But the recording was just the beginning. While Colleen had been busy planning her grand exit with Dr. Raoul, I'd been building something much more comprehensive. Remember how I mentioned that she'd shared her social media passwords with me months ago? Well, I'd been very busy with those. I'd been documenting everything. Screenshots of her private messages with Dr. Raoul, where they talked about keeping their relationship secret. Photos from their Monaco trip that she'd never posted publicly. Text conversations where they made fun of my career and planned how to handle our breakup. Credit card statements showing Dr. Raoul's spending on their relationship while his wife thought he was at medical conferences. But more importantly, I'd been building a comprehensive timeline of their affair and preparing to share it with the people who mattered most to both of them. Dr. Raoul's wife, whose contact information I'd found through his social media. Colleen's entire professional network, including her boss and the coworkers she'd been lying to about our relationship. The medical board that licensed Dr. Raoul's practice. Colleen's parents, who had always been polite to me but clearly thought their daughter could do better. While she was screaming about my worthless fake diamond ring and waving around photos of her Cartier jewelry, I calmly asked the waiter for the check, just for my meal, exactly like the original premise promised. Dr. Raoul tried to say something about calming down and discussing this rationally, but I ignored him completely. Colleen demanded to know where I thought I was going and who was going to pay for her meal and Dr. Raoul's. I told her that since she'd just announced to the entire restaurant that she was finally free from me, she was also free to handle her own finances. Dr. Raoul could cover her dinner since he was so successful and generous with his credit card. That's when Dr. Raoul started getting nervous about the public scene and tried to get Colleen to lower her voice. He obviously didn't want any more attention drawn to their situation, especially with people recording. But Colleen was too invested in her dramatic exit to listen to him. She followed me toward the restaurant exit, still talking loudly about how I was a loser who would never amount to anything. She said I was pathetic for walking away instead of fighting for her, that I was proving everything she'd said about my lack of ambition and drive. Other diners were staring, and some were definitely still recording the whole thing. I kept walking and laughing just like I'd planned, because I knew that in about 12 hours, both of their worlds were going to implode in ways they couldn't even imagine. The first phase of my plan activated the next morning. Dr. Raoul's wife received a detailed email with screenshots of his credit card statements, photos from Monaco, and text messages between him and Colleen discussing their relationship. Not from me directly, but from an anonymous account I'd set up weeks earlier. The email was professional and factual, just presenting the evidence without commentary. Phase 2 hit Colleen's professional network. Her LinkedIn connections, including her boss and several important clients, received anonymous messages with screenshots of her private social media posts about our relationship. Posts where she'd made fun of retail workers and talked about how embarrassing it was to date someone beneath her social class. Messages where she'd discussed manipulating our relationship timeline to look better to her professional contacts. But the real masterpiece was Phase 3. I'd created a comprehensive social media post documenting our entire relationship timeline, complete with screenshots of her messages about being embarrassed by my job, photos of the engagement ring she'd called fake and worthless, and a detailed breakdown of how she'd systematically lied to everyone about our relationship while planning her exit strategy with a married man. I didn't post it on my own accounts, though. I'd built fake profiles over several months and connected them to all of our mutual friends, her coworkers, and extended social network. The post went viral within our social circles before either of them even knew it existed. Dr. Raoul's medical practice started getting calls from patients asking about his professional ethics. Colleen's boss scheduled a meeting with her about maintaining professional standards and workplace reputation. Her parents called asking what the hell was going on and why everyone they knew was sending them screenshots of their daughter's relationship drama. But the beautiful part was that neither of them could trace any of it back to me directly. I'd been careful to use anonymous accounts and proxy networks. As far as anyone knew, I just walked out of that restaurant and disappeared from their lives. The desperate phone calls started on day 3, exactly like I'd planned. Colleen called me 17 times in a row, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. She'd figured out that somehow her entire life was falling apart and wanted to know what I'd done. She said she was sorry for how things ended, and that we needed to talk about fixing the situation. The first voicemail was angry. She was demanding to know what I'd done and threatening to expose whatever scheme I was running. But by the 5th call, her tone had completely changed. She was crying and begging me to pick up the phone. By the 10th call, she was offering to do anything to make things right between us. Dr. Raoul tried calling too, but I'd blocked his number before any of this started. His wife had apparently kicked him out and was filing for divorce. Several of his patients had switched to other doctors after seeing the evidence of his affair and questionable spending habits. The medical board was reviewing complaints about his professional conduct, specifically regarding his abuse of patient trust and misrepresentation of his availability for medical emergencies while he was actually on vacation with other women. But it wasn't just the professional consequences that were destroying him. His wife had frozen their joint accounts and was demanding a forensic accounting of all their finances for the past year. She'd found out about not just Colleen, but 2 other women he'd been seeing on the side. Colleen's messages got more desperate as the days went on. She'd been put on administrative leave from her job pending a review of her social media activity and professional conduct. Her networking contacts were distancing themselves from her because being associated with someone who publicly mocked service workers and had an affair with a married doctor was bad for their own professional images. Her parents were furious about the public embarrassment and had cut off the financial support they'd been providing for her lifestyle. Turns out, Colleen's expensive apartment and luxury purchases were being subsidized by family money, and her parents weren't interested in funding someone who had humiliated their family name with such public relationship drama. She begged me to call her back and explain what was happening. She said she'd do anything to fix the situation and that she understood now that she'd made a terrible mistake. She promised she'd never cared about Dr. Raoul and that I was the only person she'd ever really loved. The final message she left was her crying and saying she knew I'd somehow orchestrated everything that was happening to her and Dr. Raoul. She said she was impressed by how methodical and thorough my revenge had been, and that she'd never realized how intelligent and capable I actually was. She said she finally understood that I'd been playing chess while she was playing checkers, and that she'd completely underestimated the man she'd thrown away. 3 years later, I'm still working retail management, and I love my job. Colleen never recovered her professional reputation and ended up moving to another state. Dr. Raoul lost his medical license, and his wife took him for everything in the divorce, and I never responded to a single one of their calls or messages. Sometimes the best revenge is showing someone exactly who they decided to underestimate.